Cool. Well, thanks again for joining in on this week's conversation. We had so much fun last week, just talking about real relationships, being vulnerable with one another, and I think that gives us a lot of momentum to build on this week. And I don't know if you guys have ever done like Google searches, things like that, or what is the most popular search right now on Google. But one that constantly comes up year after year is the question, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And I think that these are important questions that all of us have asked at one point in our lives. Some of us are afraid to ask those questions, but I think that that's where I want to go with the conversation today, is this idea of purpose and calling, other words like this that just speaks to our identity and purpose of being here. So how about we just open up the conversation to that for tonight's episode of Culture and Coffee. And let's just begin. Let's go into it.
Yeah.
Cool. I think a lot of times, like, and even last week when we spoke about kind of like being vulnerable, I think like part of that is being vulnerable with yourself, and I think that leads into kind of understanding your purpose. Because I feel like if you, at least in my perspective, I feel like a lot of times when you're looking for your calling, you can't look for your calling if you're too busy worrying about being someone else.
Wow.
So like I feel like it's having an honest conversation with yourself and saying, hey, like, what do I bring to the table? What are my passions? What are my dreams? And how can I live that out honestly, and being true to myself and not focusing on other people.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's really powerful. How about some of the others in this circle? Just, maybe even you're working a job right now that doesn't line up with what you're actually called to, what you believe your purpose is. I think that that's another question that so many of us have, especially our generation, where maybe you're still working an entry-level job, or you're working in an environment because this is what was available. What does that look like in your context?
Well, I can speak to that because that's literally my season right now, where I'm working at Honeywell. I'm in a corporate position, more the business world kind of thing, which was my major, but my calling, my heart is to be in ministry, to be able to serve more in that sense. And so being in a corporate context is obviously very different from that. And so the one thing that I've held on to during this season, where I actually know I'm where I'm supposed to be right now, although I know I won't stay there, is that God works in seasons.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the greatest things that we can hold on to, especially for young adults, is life comes in seasons. God created seasons. And just because you're in something now doesn't mean you'll stay there, but God is using it. Right. So for me, it's like, okay, what is God doing in me right now? What is he building in me that he knows that I'm going to need for where I'm going?
Wow, yeah.
That's so good.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think even going off of Megan, I think it's really interesting. So before I had this job, I was interning at BlackRock. And I still remember the conversation I had with Josh Fay, kind of him being just brutally honest with me and saying, hey, I'm going to present something to you, and I don't think you're going to like it. And he said, most of your full-time job is going to be you doing finance. And I hated finance. I actually did an internship when I was in college. And I still remember saying to myself, man, I would never work in finance. And I just remember looking at Josh and saying, yeah, Josh, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And something that Josh said that I think so many people, especially in our generation, don't understand. So Josh said, I knew you would say yes because you would give your left kidney, or you would give your kidney, for this church.
Wow.
And it was this idea that, man, I'm just faithful to the place that God has planted me.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be a church, right? That can be your job in general, and just being faithful in that, and being obedient to the place that God is kind of calling you to at that moment. And I think it's just so cool because even kind of 2 months into my new job now, I can still see, man, the Lord actually needed me to work on what it looked like to be administrative, what it looked like to look at numbers in order for me to do what I'm doing now. Even though it's a ministry position, it doesn't look anything like my last position, But man, the Lord taught me something of what it looked like to be faithful there, so I could use that in my life now.
Oh, that's so good.
I definitely like where this conversation is going so far. Just the idea of God working in seasons. Andres, you sharing about how your boss and your organization brought you into the organization, but doing something that you weren't necessarily super passionate about to begin with. And when you brought up this whole idea of seasons, Megan, I immediately, for whatever reason, the show Friends came to my mind. Okay, and if you haven't watched the show, it's about these group of friends, these young people that are trying to discover purpose and calling together. And I think that, as you mentioned, so often we think that, to bring it into cinema, we think that we have one plot line in like a movie, but God works in different seasons.
Wow, yeah.
More like that Netflix show where there's development, there's character development in every season. We see in the show Friends that there's different gifts and talents that come out as the show progresses year after year. And I think that the same is so true for us. And when it specifically comes to Friends, how about you guys just maybe share a little bit about how have your friends, how has community helped shape your calling and purpose in your own life and discovering what that is for you?
I think one of the things that impacted me the most, I heard years ago, it was like Banning Liebscher and Becky Johnson when they were just starting, like JC Sacramento wasn't a thing. It was just like Jesus Culture, and they had this leaders podcast. And they were talking to Becky about, like, she was actually the one who didn't know at the time what she was going to be doing. Now she has developed so much, but she had so many opportunities to serve in different places within the church at that time. And one thing she said is that impacted her life, and then I heard impacted my life, is like, until you know what you're called to do, serve someone else's purpose.
Wow. So good.
And I was just like, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because so many times we're so lost about, like, oh yeah, so-and-so has a clear calling in their life, and there's all these Christianese words about like, oh, they know their purpose. I have no idea what I want to do, so what am I supposed to be doing right now, right? And she's like, serve someone else's purpose. And in doing that, there's something like so honoring and so powerful in it, because you're helping lift someone else up and what they know with certainty. But God is so good that on the other side of that, he's revealing things about yourself that you don't understand at that time. So much of what has pointed to my purpose has come out in doing something that I didn't even think I could do. And when a leader came up to me and said, do you want to run the guest connections team? And I'm like, sure, I guess I'm outgoing and I'm like talking to people. Or do you want to set up lunch, or do you want to meet up with this person and tell them about your story? And I didn't see that like in me, but I didn't understand that at that time those experiences would build up and point into a direction of what I was supposed to be doing. And I only knew that because of the humility. I only had the opportunity to experience it because I said yes, like Andre did, to something that didn't seem like I loved at the time, but it revealed something inside of me. So I feel like it's so hard for us, because if we're looking, we don't give people the opportunity to show us.
That humility could actually be a pathway, which seems so counterintuitive. Like, in the business world, I can say that you have to like prove yourself, you have to put yourself out there, you have to show that you're the best, you have to make yourself known. And what you guys are talking about is literally the opposite. Like, how often does Jesus in the Bible like flip something on its head? And like, what is the kingdom way to stepping into your purpose and calling? It's beautiful.
I'm in corporate too, and so like I feel like, and I'm in HR at that, and so like we talk a lot about like career paths and things like that. And a lot of times in corporate world, like when you are about to graduate, going into that, they say, hey, there's this linear path that you have to get to X, Y, and Z. And then on top of that, they tell you to grind it out. But what happens when you're grinding it out and it doesn't seem like you're still along that pathway? There's like a roadblock there, or life tells you to take a detour and it doesn't seem like that's where you're supposed to go. And so then if they don't, there's no life advisory board or anything like that to tell you like, hey, this is what you're doing a detour. And so like we're so focused on what we can see in front of us because we've been told this, that like we're lacking also just even the opportunity to be able to like allow God to say, hey, this might help you know, where you want to go, where you think you want to go, you know, in life, not just even in a career, but in your calling overall.
Have you guys ever had something in life where you thought that this was going to be your purpose and your calling and your destiny, but you found out, maybe in a tough way too, that this was not the case? Like, for example, I was convinced growing up that I was destined to play for the Boston Red Sox. Like, I know. And I think it was my own doing why I'm not playing for the Boston Red Sox now. I could be playing for them. I want, you know, there's a hole to fill right now with Mookie Betts out in LA, which I was thinking about, you know, doing a career switch at this point in my life. But you know what? It actually took close friends and family to speak some common sense into me and say, Rob, you're not going to be an MLB player. Like, you like baseball, you're pretty good at it, but I think that there's actually a different purpose and calling in life for you. And to be honest, it really hurt at first when I thought that this was my dream, that this was my destiny. But I'm, you know, looking back, I'm so glad for them speaking truth into me, because now in the context of serving, like you mentioned earlier, and having those real conversations with people that were closest to me, I was able to heed to their instruction. And actually, it reminds me of a proverb. In Proverbs 27:6, it says, "Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy." And I think that that's like so true. Like, man, your real friends are gonna tell you, like, either confirm or deny certain things in your life. So my first filter, if you will, of like, is this for me, are the people closest to me, are the voices that are most prevalent in my life agreeing with this decision. Have you guys experienced that too? You know, maybe for better or for worse. Like, maybe you could relate to me and be like, I thought I was going to do this thing, but my friends told me no. Or, hey, you know what? I thought I was going to do this, and I had some friends that encouraged me in that, where my dreams were actually lifted up.
Yeah, you and I had, before we even moved to Connecticut, lived in Florida, and we had, between the two of us, probably about 10 mentors that kind of shared, you know, the path that we wanted to follow. Like, they just lived lives that we were like, hey, we want to be like you when we grow up. And I remember asking them, we sat them down individually, and we said, hey, we think that the Lord might have another door for us. Could you just pray about a decision we have coming up? We didn't give any specifics. That's all we said. Well, I don't know how many weeks later it was, but every single one of them came back and said, hey, I don't know why, but God keeps highlighting Connecticut to me. Wow. And so that's how we ended up here at Black Rock and at Sanctuary, was through mentors pouring into our life that had seen us from where we were, and were able to hear and see from the Lord on our behalf of, this is where you're supposed to go. And it was just amazing that all of them, like, it was a group of people that said, hey, you're supposed to go. And I think, too, if it was one person, I'd be like, okay, God, I don't know. But it was a whole group of people that heard from the Lord on our behalf.
Totally.
Awesome.
Wisdom in the counsel of many is what I'm hearing here. It's so good. Cool. Michelle, how about you share part of your story a little bit? So for those of you that don't know Michelle, she teaches music at a school, but is also one of our super faithful worship leaders regularly in our community. Can you just maybe explain a little bit about your journey for what that looked like for you, discovering this calling to music and teaching and leading others in worship?
I think that music has always been a part of my life. I didn't know it to what capacity. It wasn't until recently that I felt like worship specifically within music was where my heart was really at. But it's really tough because music being on platform, it's one of those things where you kind of have to wrestle with, like, is this my human flesh desire to want to be in this position, or is it something that, you know, that I'm called to do? And so having community around to really confirm that is super important, because I think oftentimes we are struggling with our own desires, and our own desires aren't always aligned with God's desires.
Right.
Yeah.
So being able to bounce off, those kind of things and have those conversations with other people gives us sort of like a filter to kind of double check ourselves.
Yeah. And speaking of God's desires, just to wrap up this conversation a little bit and give handles for people to discuss now and take home with them, I think to even distinguish between like, all right, my specific purpose, but also general calling, I think it's so important that we remember we're first called to God.
Yeah.
And we're second called to become more like Him.
Beautiful.
I think of 2 Timothy 1:9, where it says, "For God saved us and called us to live a holy life." So that is our primary calling, is to be in relationship with God through the saving relationship of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
And then to live a holy life, which, is simply to become more like Jesus in the process. That is our primary calling. And as we pursue that, I think that specific calling and purpose becomes more revealed through a thriving relationship with Him and through real relationships with each other. Well, thanks so much for this week's conversation. I think that we're giving people a lot to talk about, a lot to think about right now. And we just want to encourage people as well to share some of the thoughts that they've been having last week and this week as well. We would love to just comment on those things and help people. So thanks again for tuning into this week's Culture and Coffee. Look forward to meeting with you guys again next week. I'm having fun. You guys having fun?
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
So good. Hey, online church fam, thank you so much for listening to this week's message. We hope that it encouraged you, inspired you, and was practical to where you are in your faith right now. If you're anything like me, you might be wondering, Rob, what is next? Well, good news for you. In our description, we have a whole what's next section. So hey, if you were listening to today's message, and you're like, I want to place my faith in Jesus for the first time, rededicate my life, or I just have questions about it, we have a special link just for you to help guide you through some of those things. And we want to celebrate together with you what it looks like to have a life eternally with Jesus. Hey, if you were listening to today and you were like, I want to get better connected into this community, we have a link for you as well that can get you connected to groups and other opportunities here. Or if you just want to join in and you're like, hey, I want to support what's going on here and join in with the spirit of generosity that this community holds, man, we have a link for you as well. So check out the What's Next step. And if you can do me a favor, if this message helped you today, will you help me by sharing it with other people so we can continue to get the word out and the good news about Jesus all across our world? Thank you so much again. We love you, and we'll see you next week.